Good morning, everyone. Looking at simple interest today. I'm going to cover a few things before we start. First of all, I'm going to cover what is interest, what is meant by the word interest. And I'm guessing we're not talking about your attention span, but we're talking about in the financial sense, so the money sense. So whenever you invest money, well, I guess you give money to someone. All right. Let's say, for example, you want to lend your brother $100. Now, you're not going to just give it to him and expect him to pay back the $100 for nothing. I guess what you expect is for him to say, well, I'm going to pay you back the $100, but I'm going to sort of charge you a bit of fee because, I didn't have that $100 for a little while, so I should get something back in return. Now, that might be a favor or, that sort of thing, but when we're talking about money, okay, it's in terms of getting a little bit extra money back. So let's say, for example, your brother says, you know what, okay, if you lend me $100, I'll give you $10 back on top of that. So that amount that he gives back, which is the extra amount, okay, that is what we refer to as interest. All right? Unless, of course, you have a really nice brother who's going to lend you money for free. Now, any time that you put your money into a bank account, particularly like a savings account, that's exactly what you're doing. You're lending the bank your money, and they in return give you back extra money at the end of the month or the end of the year, etc. That extra money is what we refer to as interest. Now, usually interest is calculated as a percentage, so a percentage of the amount that you're lending or the amount that you're investing. Usually they might say, or usually they have it as a percentage per annum. For example, 5% per annum. Now, if you're not sure what per annum refers to, that simply means per year. Okay, so when we're talking about simple interest, it's sort of calculating 5% of the money that you're investing, and that's going to be the return at the end of the year. So in this particular case, it wasn't 5% because, what percentage is $10 of 100? Hopefully you might recognize that that's actually 10%. So in this case, when we lent our brother some money, we gave him an interest rate of 10% per annum, and that was over the entire year. Now, obviously, you might not invest money over the entire year, so that can create a little bit of an issue sometimes, where you need to sort of change the percentage rate. But to be honest, most of the questions that you deal with simple interest will be over a per year amount. So I'm going to look at an example before we look at the actual formula that we use, because there is a nice little formula that we use. So it says here that I'm investing $500 at 6% per annum for 3 years. So what that refers to is we're needing to calculate what 6% of $500 is. And if we can work that out, we then know how much money that we're going to be given for each year that money's been borrowed for. So how do we find 6% of $500? There's lots of different ways. With a calculator, however, there's two main ways. The first would most likely be doing 6 over 100 and then timesing it by $500. That's the first way, I guess. But the second way, which is definitely my preferred way, is putting it as a decimal, 0.06 times 500. When we start looking at our next topic, which is going to be compounding interest, or our next lesson, compounding interest, you'll recognize why I prefer it as a decimal. So as you're doing these questions, could you please try and use it as a decimal as opposed to the fraction? And certainly on your calculators, guys, I don't like people putting in 6% on the calculator. I know it's possible. However, I like for more meaning to be made there by putting it as a decimal. So whichever way you decide to do it, hopefully the second way here, you'll recognize that 6% of $500 is $30. Now, simple interest, I haven't mentioned this before, but simple interest is also called fixed interest because the interest rate doesn't change. So what's happening here is I'm earning $30 for every year that my investment is being made. So it's being made for 3 years, so I'm now going to times that by 3 to make a total of $90. So I'm going to make $90 of interest over that year. I could also work out how much money I have altogether if that's what the question had asked, where I would have now a value or a total of $590. So I started with $500, I have earned $90 interest, so I now have a total of $590. So what's the formula that I've been talking about? Well, if we look at this thing here, 0.06, or that 6%, that's what we refer to as the interest rate. We like to call that R. The 500 is what we start with. Often we call this the principal amount. Okay, that's the principal amount. So we're going to call that P. And then this times 3, because remember that's the amount there, that our interest, our times 3 is the number of years. In that case, we did it for 3 years, and we like to call that N. And the amount that we've got at the end of it, we recognize is how much interest we've got. So if I rewrite that a little bit nicer, we can call that I equals PRN. P, which is our principal, which was the $500, if I rewrite it here. My R is my interest rate as a decimal, 0.06, and the N is the number of years, which is 3. And that would then generate the interest being earned, which we already recognize that to be $90. Now remember though, that only calculates the interest, not the actual value of my investment, which was the $590. So we need to be careful there. So that's the formula that you need to remember for simple interest. I equals PRN. Now, if we go on to our first example, if you would like to perhaps pause this and then have a go at this question, you're most welcome to. Alright, so how do I know this is simple interest? Well, it doesn't mention anything else about any other type of interest. Later on you'll see something called compound interest, which says compounding with a period attached to it. In this case, it's just 8% per annum. So I look at this and I'd say, okay, this means I equals PRN. Sometimes people don't even use the formula. They just use their common sense like with that previous question. So the first question says calculate the interest earned. Well, using my formula, I equals, the principal is what we start with, is $1,500. My interest rate as a decimal would be 0.08. That calculates the interest for 1 year. Our N, however, is for 5 years. So I simply need to put that into my calculator, left to right, to generate the interest earned. In this case, that would P, so I'm being a bit slow there because I'm doing my calculations, equals $600. So I would earn $600 of interest over that 5-year period. Now, that's for the first question. You'll notice the second question says calculate the total amount. Well, if I invested $1,500, I then earned $600 of interest, well, that means that in my bank account at the moment, or wherever my investment is, I have $2,100. So again, be very careful about which of these two questions that they might ask. They might ask both, but certainly they might just ask for one or the other. All right, let's have a look at a more challenging type of question. Question 3, again, pause it if you wish. I earn $600 of interest. Well, this is a little bit different. They're telling me how much interest that I've earned on a $2,000 investment. Well, that's my investment being made. That's my principal amount over 3 years. Well, that's the number of years, that's N, and it says find the interest rate. And we know that the rate is R. So when I'm looking at my formula, I equals PRN, we have this time an I value, we have a P value, we have an N value, but we're trying to locate what the R was. So in fact, you know what, it is financial maths, absolutely, but it's also just algebra, it's an equation. So I'm going to put the 600 where the I was, I'm going to put the 2000 where the P was, times the R, I don't know what R is, and times the 3. Now, there are lots of different ways that you could solve this equation. You could take the 2,000 across to the left-hand side first of all, and then take the 3 across. But like some people might go, you know what, I'm just going to simplify 2,000 times 3 because that's going to be 6,000. And now what I can do is divide both sides by 6,000 because, you know, the opposite of times 6,000 is divide by 6,000. And then all I'm going to be doing is putting that into my calculator as 600 divided by, or certainly you can put it as over as I've written here in the working out, and that comes out to be 0.1. Now remember, it's asked for the interest rate. That is the interest rate as a decimal. If I put my 0 there, we can clearly see that it's 10% per annum. And you could check that by putting it back in and doing 2,000 times 0.1 times 3, and your answer should hopefully be the $600. Okay, last question here, guys. Again, this is going to be slightly more challenging, so pause it if you wish. I'm investing $500. Well, that's how much I'm investing. It's my principal at 12% per annum. Well, that's an interest rate. And want to have a total, well, that's a bit different, a total of $700. Okay, how long would I need to invest for to the nearest month? All right, so if I think about my I equals PRN, this is slightly more complex because obviously I have my P and I have my R. I don't have my N, and it does say how long, so that's the one I'm finding. So they must have the I there, but I can't see the interest earned. However, we do see that extra amount of $700. Now that's the total amount. Well, if I'm investing $500 and I end up with $700, well, that means that I must have earned a total of $200 extra, which that extra amount we know to be our interest. So that means that I actually do have my interest. The interest is $200. So 200 is equal to my principal of 500 times my interest rate of 0.12 times my N. Now likewise, you can times the 500 times the 0.12 together if you wish. You could simply, apologies there, you could simply do this. You could say 200 divided by the 500 times 0.12 equals N. You could just do 200 divided by 500, get your answer, and then divide by 0.12 get, after that. That's how I generally put it into the calculator, but it's up to you on how you would like to do that. But if I do that now, our answer is going to come out to be N equals 3.3 recurring. Now, that's quite complex. So it goes to a more challenging question because it says here, not to the nearest year. That would be 3 years, or you'd probably have to be 4 years, wouldn't it? Because you'd have to sort of do a little bit extra than 3 years. But it says to the nearest month. So this is a third. So how can I find that in terms of months? Well, there's two ways. Okay, I could just times this whole thing by 12 because that would put it into months automatically. And that would give me a total of 40 months. 40 months. You might have written 3 years. And what's a third of 12? Well, a third of 12, hopefully you would say, is 4. So you could also say 3 years and 4 months. And it says to the nearest month, so either of those two options would be acceptable. Okay, remember, when you get N, this is in terms of years, but ask us for in terms of to the nearest month. Okay, I hope that made a bit of sense. It is pretty easy for the most part. The next lesson is going to be a bit more complex when we do compound interest, but certainly if you have any questions, please let me know. Have a great day, folks. Bye-bye.